Joe Biden just gave the State of the Union speech, and it was pretty good. I'm pretty surprised to find out it was pretty good. It was very energetic, very politically aggressive. He took the fight to the Republicans in a way that was surprising. It was as aggressive a speech as I have seen, certainly from Joe Biden, in the context of a State of the Union. But honestly, in the State of the Union, they try sometimes to not be so political, and they'll put in a bunch of bipartisan lines, and there'll be a bunch of lines where their side will applaud for and a bunch that both sides will applaud for. There wasn't much of that here at all. He just attacked Republicans and his predecessor, as he kept calling Trump throughout the speech. All night long, he hit him and hit him and hit him, and the Democrats kept standing, and Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, only got up twice during the entire speech, which is a near record low. I haven't kept track of that, but I've never seen the opposition get up so little, partly because the Republicans are obstinate and don't want to get up for anything and don't want to applaud anything that's Democratic, but partly because Biden was giving a super aggressive speech. Okay, attaboy, that's the kind of thing we want to see. Now, don't get me wrong, was it filled with nothing but accuracies? Not exactly. Were there good things in it? Yes. So the two things that I really like are the fact that he's building a port to bring in humanitarian assistance to Gaza. His policy towards Israel and the rest of his speech in that regard, I think, was a disaster. But credit where credit is due on the port. Let's rush that aid in as quickly as we can. And obviously we have to do that because our so-called ally won't let us bring in humanitarian assistance through the roads. The right-wing government of Israel is currently starving the Palestinians, and we have to get around them. So we give them $4 billion a year, want to give them an extra $14 billion a year to do more bombing. We found out today in a report, Joe Biden's actually sent them weapons literally hundreds of times since October 7th, not getting congressional approval, just sending more and more weapons, including bunker busters that drop 2,000-pound bombs. His policy on Israel is awful overall, but I'm glad that he's finally getting around the ally and building that port so we can finally make sure that those people don't starve. But it's going to take a couple of weeks, and a lot of them are going to die in the meanwhile. So we're going to spend money on the port. We're going to spend money on bombing them. We're going to spend money on everything that Israel wants and some of the things that they don't want and are forcing us to do because they won't help. But I like the port, okay? Now, the other thing is, the thing that Biden does not get enough credit for is the 15% minimum tax on corporations. That is one of the best bills that the Democrats have passed in terms of corporate taxes. So he said he'd raise the corporate tax rate, he didn't. And there were many odes to corporations throughout the speech, but that portion is great and we appreciate it. So you've got to be fair, give credit where credit is due. Overall, pretty good speech, pretty good speech. Now, having said that, of course, I got to talk about the downsides too. And he had a couple of stumbles here and there, and with Biden, you get more nervous than you normally would. A couple of stutters, but overall, not a big deal. The fact that he was so energetic and loud overwhelmed those tiny little blips. And if it didn't, you know me, I would definitely tell you, right? And so he talks smack to the Republicans. I like that part too. So he'd look at him because that worked on Social Security last time around. So he kind of goaded them every once in a while. He'd look at them. I was like, oh, you don't want to? You don't want to give the wealthy another $2 trillion tax cut? And I was like, okay, there you go, Joseph. I like that attitude. He once said, you don't want to do that, huh? Okay, I like that he was taunting him. It worked for him last time. It worked really well this time. You know how he sometimes leans in and goes, no, really, I gotta tell you something. And he whispers, especially with his age, not a good idea to whisper. But this time he was almost yelling. But I say that as a compliment, that's good. Nice, aggressive, in charge. The Democrats were chanting 4 more years. You know, it's a little unstate of the union, but my God, for a guy who's so soft and so in love with the Republicans throughout his career, this is a welcome, refreshing, different Joe Biden. This is the Joe Biden we need to see on the campaign trail. So very happy with that. Now, he couldn't help himself. A couple times in the speech, one time he was supposed to criticize Wall Street, but he's like, now don't get me wrong, I like Wall Street. I'm like, oh God, I know, dude. You've taken more corporate contributions than almost anybody. Pelosi and McConnell haven't beat, maybe Hillary Clinton, but so don't say you like Wall Street in the middle of a speech where you're trying to criticize Wall Street, but he can't help himself. Donors don't mind me, I still like it. He bragged about how he comes from the state with the most amount of corporations and how much he likes corporations. It's okay to say, hey, we need business to be strong in America without doing like a giant love letter to corporate America and to Wall Street, but that's who Joe Biden is. Look, guys, some of the things that he talked about were great. The problem is, I have to be honest with you, it's a trick. See, for example, he said, why don't you pass paid leave? Well, what, brother, why don't you propose it? Like for most of the things that he said that you like, they're part of his discarded agenda that he doesn't even care about. He even brought up higher minimum wage. He's the one that killed higher minimum wage. He told the 2 Delaware senators to vote against it. 8 Democratic senators voted against it when Bernie Sanders proposed it. So he's totally full of crap on that. He bragged so much about lowering drug prices. Don't you mean lowering drug price? He's lowered the price on only one drug. And Democrats are like, one drug, we're such champions. No, you're not. The other tens of thousands of drugs are still super expensive and Medicare can't negotiate with them, which makes no sense at all. Biden didn't fix that. In fact, I have to be honest with you guys. What he did was counterproductive. He made it look like we fixed it when he regulated only one drug so far. And then he says, well, but don't worry, in a couple of years, that could go all the way up to 10 drugs. Ooh, don't hurt him, Joe. So that's just covering for the drug companies. I can't stand that. On immigration, he called them illegals. I mean, Joe Biden during the campaign in 2020 thought he was getting outflanked on the left. And he's like, what are you talking about? I love undocumented immigrants. Now all of a sudden they're illegals. But he did turn around and say, look, I'm not going to demonize immigrants coming into this country. They're good people, but we've got to follow the rules, et cetera, et cetera. That part is totally fine, but you don't have to use Republican talking points in order to sound tough on immigration. Actually believe in your own policies. He had more stuff that he said, but doesn't mean. He said, oh, we got to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. You guys threw that under the bus. You barely tried. You proposed it. They killed it with a filibuster. And you said, well, I mean, I moved the filibuster for lifting the debt ceiling so the stock market wouldn't crash. But voting rights, nah, I don't want to move the filibuster for that. So honestly, not true. In terms of his priorities and how hard he tried. He said, why don't you pass universal background checks? Every time he says something like that, by the way, that polls as high as 97%. Gun owners want it, NRA members want it. There's nothing wrong with a universal background check. The only people who don't want it are gun manufacturers who fund the NRA, who fund Republican politicians. But Biden's never going to talk about the donors because he also takes massive money from the donors. But if you like universal background checks, why don't you propose it in the Senate? Remember, the Democrats control the Senate. They could propose any of these things and they totally refuse to. So it's just, this is lip service and marketing. So I'm an honest analyst. I give him good marks for good political strategy and good marketing here of his agenda, which he doesn't do often. In the beginning of the speech, he did a great job with that, bragging about how inflation in America is the lowest inflation in the whole world. Why don't you say that every day? You should be screaming that from the rooftops, but he did in this case. So credit where credit is due. He talked about how unemployment is at a record low. Of course you should do that. So that's exactly, this was for folks who don't know the inner details of politics and what the Democrats do instead of what they say, I would say this was borderline terrific speech. If you know that the Democrats and Biden are full of crap on a huge percentage of what he's talking about, then you can't help but be honest and tell people that as well. But remember, whatever the Democrats are bad at, the Republicans are worse. I mean, he was like, let's make sure that billionaires are paying their fair share. And the Republicans wouldn't stand up for that, wouldn't applaud. They're like, no. And he's like, well, why don't we have them pay their fair share and then we can help the average American worker? And the Republicans are going, no, boo, boo, right? They didn't actually boo there, they booed in other places. But don't forget, the Republican Party are total fake populists. They represent the rich and corporate America more than anyone else does. So he said, restore that child tax credit. That was in the first year of your term, brother. and then you never even bothered to try to bring it back. How could they restore it if you're not proposing it? I don't know why the Democrats don't propose their incredibly popular policies. Well, I do know, because they don't actually want to pass a lot of them. That's what the rest of the media won't ever tell you. He says, imagine paid leave. Yeah, that's the only thing we do is imagine it, because you won't propose it. It's so easy to, at a minimum, politically embarrass the Republicans, because they're all gonna vote against paid family leave, and it polls at 84%, 74% of Republican voters want it. There's no downside to proposing it in the Senate, except for the fact that their donors will get mad at them. So, like I said, don't get me wrong, even though I liked what he said about the port in regards to Israel, the rest of it was total Israeli propaganda. Oh, the cowards in Hamas are hiding behind their human shields. What do you think they're gonna do? They're gonna come out in the middle of an open field and be like, hey, Israel, we're right here, it's a bomb right here, okay? No, they're hiding among the civilians, because that's the only place there is. So they're all imprisoned together, along with the civilians, in these open air prison camps that Israel runs, called West Bank and Gaza Strip. And then of course, Gaza Strip has been absolutely decimated. So look, we keep it real here. Optically, it was a very good speech, especially as we were nervous about how Biden was gonna deliver on this speech. There was one bad piece of optics, which was one of the congressmen kept waving his cane and it was coming in front of the camera when Biden was trying to look young. You don't really want the cane on camera all the time. But otherwise, it was good optically and from a messaging point of view. In terms of the substance of the message, unfortunately, 70% of it is still not really true, but there were a couple of good points in there, including the 15-minute corporate minimum tax. So that's your reality on the Biden speech.